Through the centuries, people have believed that the God who guided Moses and the Israelites was the same God that Jesus Christ spoke of. But what would happen if they told you that this God was actually an extraterrestrial? You may be outraged, but first you have to see all the evidence that ufologists have presented, and perhaps this Yahweh was nothing more than an alien imposter, because he was too imperfect, angry, cruel, etc., to be God, and the way in which he manifested himself had too much of an extraterrestrial ship. During the long time that Moses led the Israelites, we see that he practically did not make important decisions without consulting him. Up to this point, there would not seem to be anything strange, but if we take into account that Yahweh did not want intermediaries between him and Moses, and if we consider how it all began, we will see that the story does give food for thought. Thus, Moses' first encounter with Yahweh, at the time when Moses was a shepherd and had not yet assumed leadership of the Hebrews, was when Moses saw a bush that was burning without being consumed. The Exodus says, the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in the form of a flame of fire, in the middle of a bush. He saw that the bush was burning, but that the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I am going to see this strange case, why the bush is not consumed. When Yahweh saw that Moses was coming to look, he called out to him from the bush, saying, Moses, Moses. He replied, Here I am. He said to him, Do not come any closer, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. And he added, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. Now, here it is stated that what Moses actually saw was a type of artificial light, but, since at that time humanity had not yet discovered artificial light, he interpreted it as fire, just as he did later with the light emitted by the UFO that supposedly guided the chosen people in the desert. However, these questions arise, why did he or the aliens pretend to be God? What source did that artificial light come from? According to supporters of extraterrestrial intervention, the case of the chosen people, like others, responds to a purpose of social experimentation by extraterrestrials, so that in this framework, at least to a certain extent, the current historical situation of humanity expresses past interventions extraterrestrials, such as those that supposedly occurred among the Mayans, Egyptians, Aztecs and Babylonians, as well as among the Hebrews, which is the case that concerns us. As for the source of the artificial light, it could well have been some small device that emitted luminosity, and from which a voice came out. Here the possibility arises that this fire was the product of a certain oil within the plant, by virtue of which it, upon contact with certain chemical elements, would burn so fleetingly that it would not be consumed. Because indeed that happens with the Dictamnus albus, present in the area where Moses saw the bush burning, but the time in which it usually burns without being consumed is too short to give rise to the dialogue in the Exodus. Finally, if the theory of the artifact that emitted light is rejected, there remains the possibility of a visual auditory hallucination induced by some extraterrestrial, since the possession of psychic powers has commonly been attributed to them. All of the above might seem like the fruit of fanciful speculation, but what follows is much more convincing. This is Moses' second meeting with Yahweh, before which a ritual pact is established whose importance for the theory will be explained later. For now, look at what the Exodus tells us, and pay special attention to the underlined parts. And he said to Moses, Go up before the Lord, you, and Aaron, and Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and you will bow from afar. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and rising early in the morning he built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent some young men of the children of Israel, who offered the people, and said, Behold the blood of the covenant that the Lord has done to you all these things. Then the Lord said to Moses, Come up to me on the mountain, and wait there, and I will give you tables of stone, and the law, and commandments that I have written to teach them. And Moses arose, and Joshua ministered to him, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, Wait for us here until we return to you, and, behold, Aaron and Hur are with you, whoever has trouble, let him come to them. Then Moses went up to the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain. And the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days, and on the 7th day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a burning fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses entered into the midst of the cloud, and went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Let us now explain the previous quote. First of all, and as the most important fact, the text tells us that a cloud covered the mountain. That same cloud is alluded to in Jehovah's words later, when he says to Moses, "Look, I am going to come to you in a thick cloud so that the people may hear me speak to you and give you credit forever." You see, there is a key word, dense. On the other hand, it is also mentioned elsewhere that the cloud appeared during the day as a pillar of smoke and at night as a pillar of fire. So, what are we talking about? Namely, some ufologists have proposed that motherships sometimes have cylindrical shapes, and the cylinders can be interpreted as columns. In turn, during the day these ships would not need to turn on their exterior lights, so in the view of the town the ship would appear to be a dense column of smoke, since its color should be metallic, between grayish and silver, similar to the color of a dark cloud, while, at night, the cloud would have turned on its external lights to guide the people in the middle of the desert, and the color of the lights had to be orange, red or something similar, so the ship could be interpreted as a column of fire, since at that time humanity did not know artificial light. From what has been said, it can now be understood why the text says that the glory of Jehovah was like a burning fire on the top of the mountain, which logically would be due to the fact that the ship turned on the lights of that part of it that gave to the top of the mountain, and this luminosity was perceived as embracing fire. But then we are told that Moses entered into the midst of the cloud, and that he stayed 40 days and 40 nights. What should we think about what happened there? The answer is, Moses communicated with the aliens. Yes, it's hard to believe, but only apparently, since, when Moses returns, he has received abundant technical details for the construction of the tabernacle, place where the presence of a god would dwell, for the rites, for the offerings, for the materials of the sacred vestments, and above all for the Ark of the Covenant. The impressive thing is that the Ark of the Covenant could not be found by anyone, but only by Moses and the priests who wore an ephod. If someone encountered it under normal conditions, they would simply die. Of course you may think that it is pure biblical fiction, but scientific research has shown that if an object existed with the technical specifications, mainly, having gold plates inside and outside, separated by acacia wood, which fits with the nature of the electrical capacitor as formed by two conductive surfaces separated by a dielectric material, that the ark had, would function as an electrical capacitor, capable of accumulating, in a dry environment, like the desert in which the Hebrews were, enough static electricity to produce a fatal shock to anyone who touched it without something to dissipate said electricity to the ground. And, surprisingly, the original ephod, or the gold chain later used with the linen ephods, was made in such a way that it functioned as an electrical heat sink, so that explains how everything fit together. The question is therefore the following. Did scientific knowledge exist at that time for the Ark of the Covenant to have been thought of as a static electricity capacitor? It is known that the first scientific approaches to electricity occurred in the 17th and 18th centuries after Christ, and at that time Christ was not even born yet. Therefore, it would not be unreasonable to assume that the extraterrestrials, who surely could make ships, they knew a lot about electricity. They communicated with Moses and gave him dare to touch the object in the specifications of the Ark of the Covenant, precisely thinking of making the Hebrews believe that it was the divine presence that killed the impure, who that wrested the energy of the Lord. A perfect plan, but now, why the blood rites? According to some proponents of the theory, certain types of aliens show a particular attraction to the blood and viscera of animals, particularly cattle and other animals considered pure in Jewish ritual. Thus, for them, the extraterrestrials, posing as God, would have asked Moses for blood rites as a consequence of that aforementioned attraction, which would manifest itself in the well-known phenomenon of cattle mutilation, in which there have been multiple cases of cattle, horses and other animals that appear bled to death or with certain viscera removed by what are apparently laser surgical instruments. But in reality this hypothesis is somewhat far-fetched, and it makes more sense to assume that the cattle mutilations are due, at least mostly, to scientific and experimental purposes on the part of the aliens, assuming in advance that they are the cause, while, in the case of the Hebrew people, blood rites would have been requested based on the knowledge that the extraterrestrials must have had of the spiritual and ritual meaning that blood had for many human civilizations, including the Hebrews. However, that leaves open the issue of the prohibitions given by God to Moses regarding pure and impure foods. For example, among land animals, only those that chewed the cud and had cloven hooves could be consumed, leaving out the pig. Furthermore, animals that died of natural causes could not be consumed, only those sacrificed in a certain way, fat from certain areas could not be consumed, and every animal had to be bled and salted before being eaten, since blood was considered impure. Within the framework of the theory that the God of Moses was extraterrestrial, what reasons would the extraterrestrials have had to implement all these prohibitions? It could be suggested that everything came down to seeking healthiness, since for example, A. At that time there were no ways to get rid of parasites, tapeworm, trichina, in pigs, and this was even more dangerous to health than now. B. The blood has always had toxins. That is why it is better to consume the bled animal. C. Not consuming animals that died of natural causes saved people from exposing themselves to consuming animals that have died from illness. And Yahweh went before them, by day in a pillar of cloud to guide them on the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light so that they could march day and night. The pillar of cloud did not withdraw from the town during the day, nor the pillar of fire at night. Acts 13, 20, 22. Interpretation. It has already been explained before why it was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, it is clear that, when he says that he did not leave the town, it is because the ship remains levitating, as if to signal to the town that it must remain there. And on the day that the tabernacle was pitched, the cloud covered the tabernacle over the tent of the congregation. And in the evening there was a semblance of fire over the tabernacle until the morning. So it was continually, the cloud covered it by day, and by night the appearance of fire. And when the cloud was lifted from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel departed, and in the place where the cloud stopped, there the children of Israel camped. At the command of Jehovah the children of Israel advanced, and at the command of the Lord they camped. Every day that the cloud was over the tabernacle, they remained encamped. And when the cloud remained over the tabernacle for many days, then the children of Israel kept the ordinance of the Lord and did not depart. Numbers 9, 15-19. Interpretation. It is the same as before, only here the presence of the tabernacle, since the extraterrestrials, so that the people associate the divine presence with the sacred place, placed the ship exactly on the tabernacle, which measured about 13 meters long by 4 meters wide, and was mobile, so that the Hebrews had to take the trouble to assemble and dismantle it according to the will of the extraterrestrials, taken by them as the Lord, since it was evidently a particular extraterrestrial who spoke with Moses, as will be seen later. And the Lord spake unto Moses, after the 2 sons of Aaron were dead, when they came before the Lord, and died. And the Lord said to Moses, Tell Aaron your brother not to enter at all times into the sanctuary behind the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, lest he die. For I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. Lev. 16:1. Interpretation. Many times, those who support the theory have said that the fire from the ship's engines was what killed whoever approached, but then, how is it that Moses could approach? Faced with this question, it has been suggested that, in cases like the one above, the ship killed those who approached, not with the fire of the engines, since in reality it should not have been fire, since if so it would have burned the store of the tabernacle. Apparently, it was a type of lightning that did not burn, but its frequency could be increased to the point of being fatal to living beings. In this way, the frequency would rise when someone not allowed approached, or it would simply remain at usual levels, while, when someone allowed approached, the frequency of the lightning would have decreased. And the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people, and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and wash their garments, and be ready for the 3rd day, because on the 3rd day Jehovah will descend, in the sight of all the people, on Mount Sinai. And you shall mark a boundary for the people round about, saying, Beware, do not go up the mountain, nor touch the boundary thereof, whoever touches the mountain shall surely die, no hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot with arrows, whether he is an animal or a man, he will not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they will go up to the mountain. Exodus 19:9-13. Interpretation. Here a particular detail has been pointed out to support the theory of lightning. It is said that, to the man or animal that dies from getting close, no hand will touch him, but he will be stoned or shot with arrows. This fact is related to contemporary cases of people who have died from a supposed type of radiation from UFOs. Starting from the radiation hypothesis, it has been believed that the symptoms it caused were to a certain degree contagious, which is the reason for the prohibition of touching beings who died for passing the term imposed by Jehovah, by the extraterrestrials. Additionally, and going beyond the quote, Dr. Barry H. Downing has proposed that the oils used in the tabernacle served to protect the skin of the priests from UFO radiation, and that for that same purpose of protection was the prohibition of drink alcohol before approaching the tabernacle, since alcohol would be flammable in the face of UFO radiation. As soon as Moses entered it, the pillar of cloud came down and stopped at the entrance of the tent, while the Lord spoke to Moses. And when the people saw the pillar of cloud stopping at the entrance of the tent, each one knelt at the entrance of his own tent in an attitude of worship. God spoke to Moses face to face, as one would speak to a friend, and then Moses returned to the camp. But his helper, the young Joshua, son of Nun, never left the inside of the tent. Exodus 33, 9-11, interpretation, here, that a face-to-face means that a god, an alien, spoke personally with Moses, but not that Moses actually saw his face. Well, if so, the verse would contradict that passage in which Jehovah tells Moses, I tell you, you will not be able to see my face, because no man will be able to see me and continue living. We can then think that Moses saw some silhouette, or that he saw a luminous form without precise contours, but we can never think that he saw the face of what, according to the theory we expose, was an extraterrestrial pretending to be God. Let me see your glory, Moses pleaded. But the Lord answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will pronounce my name before you. I will have mercy on whomever I please, and I will also have compassion on whomever I please. But I tell you, you will not be able to see my face, because no man will be able to see me and continue living. The Lord also said, Look, here is a place near me. Stand on the rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a hole in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will be able to see my back, but my face must not be seen. Exodus 33, interpretation, this passage is extremely important in the theory of the extraterrestrial God, since the Lord, instead of showing him his glory in the tabernacle, he tells Moses to go and stand on a rock. He never explicitly tells him to come out, but we know that in the tabernacle there was no rock on which Moses could stand and which could be said to have a hole of such dimensions that it would allow a man to say, as he tells him Jehovah to Moses, I will put you in a hole in the rock. However, we know that the tabernacle was mobile, that a God was associated with a dense cloud, and that there were rock formations in the Sinai desert. We can then conjecture that, when he says, here by me is a place, he means that, near the UFO floating above the tabernacle, there is a natural structure that meets the characteristics of the rock pointed out by the Lord. From the above, we imagine that Moses left the tabernacle and went to the indicated rock. Now comes the key part of the passage, which is when the alien tells him, I will cover you with my hand until I have passed. Then I will remove my hand, and you will be able to see my back. Why does he say, I will cover you with my hand? Evidently, taking advantage of his supposed divine identity, the alien decides to make the UFO fly over Moses, probably displaying special lights for the moment. That's why he says, I will cover you with my hand, instead of saying, I will put my hand on your head, or something like that. The previous interpretation is reinforced by, until I have passed. Finally, when he tells him, you can see my back, we imagine that the alien gets down for a moment, but in such a way that he always has his back to Moses. Now, in the subtitle it has been indicated that all this is done to keep the Hebrew people deceived, and this is so since, if a specific face had been shown, there was a risk that, with the passage of time, the theological analyses they end up thinking about the possibility that it is some impostor entity. And Moses arose, and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart now from the tents of these wicked men. And they departed from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram round about, and Dathan and Abiram went out and stood at the doors of their tents, with their wives, and their children, and their little ones. And Moses said, By this you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I did not make them from my own heart. If these die like all men die, or if they are visited like all men, the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord does a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all their belongings, and they go down alive into the abyss, then you will know that these men provoked the Lord. And it came to pass, when he had finished speaking all these words, that the earth that was under them opened. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, and their houses, and all the men of Korah, and all their possessions. And they, with all they had, went down alive into the abyss, and the earth covered them, and they perished from the midst of the congregation. And all Israel, who were around them, fled in their cry, because they said, Let the earth also not swallow us. And fire came out from the Lord, and consumed the 250 men who offered the incense. Numbers 16, 26-35. Interpretation. Here it has been said that the UFO, which posed as the dense cloud of Jehovah, had powerful weapons capable of causing small seismic faults, and by these weapons earth opened its mouth. On the other hand, when it is said that fire came out of Jehovah and consumed the 250 men who offered incense, it is interpreted that this fire corresponded to some type of lightning fired by the ship. According to Dr. Jorge Olguin, director of the Elrin Group and supposed medium with advanced spiritual and scientific knowledge, this passage would be exemplary with respect to the responsible for the great deception carried out on the Jewish people in Sinai. And they set out from Mount Hor, on the way to the Red Sea, to go around the land of Edom, and the spirit of the people along the way was depressed. And the people spoke against God and Moses. Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to die in this desert? There is neither bread nor water, and our soul dislikes this light bread. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, which bit the people, and many people of Israel died. Numbers 21, 4-6. Interpretation. The supposed fiery serpents would actually be a very particular type of lightning, different from those previously mentioned, the one that fell on the tabernacle, and the one with which it burned the 250 men who offered incense. It would probably be some form of electrical lightning with a serpentine character, interpreted as a fiery serpent, due to the poverty of scientific knowledge at the time, and the particular ignorance of the people who followed Moses. It is said that these snakes bit the people, but that can be understood as the end of the rays being interpreted by the people as the heads of the fiery serpents. It is believed that Moses' staff was magical, and the Old Testament tells that God had even momentarily transformed it into a snake, and that when it became a snake, it devoured the staffs of Pharaoh's magicians, before becoming a staff again. Likewise, they say that Moses lifted up his staff before the waters of the Red Sea parted, and that he once struck a large rock with his staff and water gushed out of it. All of the above could be explained speculatively within the framework of the theory that proposes that the God who guided the Israelites in the desert was an extraterrestrial group, who traveled in a UFO and communicated with Moses through one of its members, who he would supposedly be the leader and architect of the social experiment. Now, it is known that science has already found scientific explanations for the 10 plagues, and we can imagine that the aliens had simply predicted that all this would happen, and acted as if they were God causing it and announcing it to Pharaoh through Moses. It can also be thought that they induced hallucinations in the Pharaoh and his court, in regards to the rod turned into a staff. But all this is too fanciful, and it makes much more sense to think that the biblical story is the embodiment, in the form of a story, of the magical symbolism that in various cultures has been given to the staffs and rods of important personalities in the sphere of magic and spirituality. Moses was a spiritual guide. That, of course, with regard to the powers of the rod of Moses, because it does seem to reflect a historical truth concerning the exodus from Egypt, and most likely Moses, we assume here that he existed, because this is a matter of debate among the historians, really threatened Pharaoh with plagues, and the plagues occurred, but not due to supernatural causes. The parting of the Red Sea has also been explained. It is said that, on a U-shaped piece of land in the Nile and a shallow lagoon along the coast, a wind of approximately 101 kilometers per hour, blowing continuously for 12 hours, can push the waters back about 2 meters deep. This can easily fit into many theories. Believers will say that God sent the wind and communicated it to Moses, while supporters of the exposed theory will think that the aliens, with their advanced technology, created the meteorological conditions necessary for the phenomenon. The aforementioned matter of the rod is presented as not very credible, but we know that other biblical episodes do certainly reflect historical events, while a third class does so in a quite probable, although not undoubted, manner. In that third class is the death of Moses. Deuteronomy says, "There Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died in the country of Moab, as Yahweh had commanded. And Yahweh himself buried him in a valley opposite Beth-Fegar, and no one to this day has known where his tomb is." He was 120 years old when he died, and his eye had not darkened, nor had he lost his vigor. The text presents unusual issues. 1. Yahweh himself buried him. 2. No one knows where the tomb is. 3. He preserved his vigor and vision at 120 years old. What can be thought about all this in the light of theory? Regarding the first, that in reality the UFO abducted the body and the burial was a farce, that is why the second is understood, which is the lack of knowledge about where his grave is. Finally, he had not lost his sight or his vigor because the extraterrestrials, probably in the 40 days he spent with them on the summit of Mount Sinai, modified his organism in such a way that his health did not deteriorate like that of a common person. Thanks you for watching the video. Remember, you can help me subscribing to my channel to more videos and mysteries about aliens.